All right, folks. Well, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Bluff Serini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on the hellscape we call Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night. This week, we're actually recording it live over YouTube, so I hope we'll get some input from our literally multiple live watchers right now. I was going to say scores, dozens, hundreds. I won't give it away, but there's like multiple people right now actively engaged in this. So very excited for that. Maybe we'll hear something from them. I have to mention that we're brought to you by Running Aces, the official sponsor of the Rec Poker Podcast. They're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. You can find out more about them at runaces.com. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we depend on support from our sponsors and from our premium members who take part in our training material and study opportunities for only $22 a month. And you can always get your first month for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. But it gets better. You can always just get a free account here. All it takes to sign up for that is an email address and a smile, although we do insist on both. And if $5 feels like a lot to try us out for the first time and $22 feels like a lot every month, I get it. But luckily, we love to support local food banks here. And if you make a donation of any amount to a local food bank and just let us know that you've done that by forwarding us the receipt or the screenshot of the payment or whatever, we will very happily credit you with a free month at at Rec Poker. So, oh, I'm on a roll, gang. We're doing great. That's why we do these live. Yeah, this is sweet. So yeah, please do support your local food bank, and we'll happily reward that with some free memberships here at Rec Poker. All right, now let's get on with the show. They let me host the show on Mondays. I am only one man here at Rec Poker. We all are very involved. It's a big group that makes the magic happen around here. That group we call the RecCing Crew because we have to put the word rec in everything because we're a bunch of big dorks. If you want to find out more about me and the rest of the RecCing Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can listen up. You're going to meet a few of them tonight, starting with producing co-host Chris Jones.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the Poker Stars home game, and I help run our monthly strategy segment called the Deep Dive.
And my name is Joe Coolis. You can find me at Joe Cool PhD, cool with a K, on Twitter or at Elvita11 in the home game. And I run PsyOps, the workshop that looks into cognitive processes that can help you in your poker game.
All right. So, speaking of problems in the poker game, sometimes it's just like, what guys, I don't know what to do. I need feedback. I need help. I want some free resources on how to get better at poker. Well, thanks for tuning in, future awesome member here at Rec Poker. I think we mentioned earlier, a lot of what we do here is free. So come on over to the website at rec.poker, sign up for a free community account with an email address and a smile, and you can use our forums. You can play in our home games. You can get access to our Discord channel. You've got a ton of free videos available to you to help bring your game to the next level. Just a ton of resources. But I'm mentioning the forums and Discord specifically because that's where we go to take posts that we think are interesting enough to mention on the air here on the forums edition of the podcast. So, Chris Jones, you have selected one. Tell us a little bit about what we are in store for today.
Yeah. So this is from our own, this is from Discord. It's from our own Rob Washam.
Mm.
I think it's a really interesting spot because I think it's the kind of thing that happens quite a bit to people. It might seem sort of like maybe less complicated. We don't get that deep into this hand, but I think it's an interesting spot, and it's one that I think we will, especially against more recreational, less experienced players, I think we'll see this kind of thing happen a decent amount. And so away we go. This is the second level of a live tournament at the Orleans in Vegas. It's a $150 buy-in with a $50 bounty. And there's 8K guaranteed. So this is not one of those progressive bounties, but there's a bounty on each player when we knock them out. And we're very early in the tournament. So the blinds are 200, 300, 300. And our hero is Rob. He's the effective stack with around 30K. So around 100 big blinds. The villain opens from the hijack to 900, so three big blinds, and it folds to Rob in the small blind, holding Ace Jack offsuit. Um, so let's before I well, should I tell you what? No, before let me just let me just describe this opponent before we say what Rob did, and maybe we can discuss some of that. So, um, this is what Rob says about the villain. Villain has been very active with lots of overbets trying to pressure opponents when he perceives weakness. Bet sizes are not that thought out. He'll just grab a bunch of chips and throw them out. I have not seen him show down a hand yet.
So
Um, yeah,
bully is kind of
yeah,
the
bully,
player type that
yeah,
jumps out at me
yeah,
there.
looser, probably looser and aggressive. One of the typical lags, kind of titles for this opponent. Um, so with that in mind, that kind of player profile early in a tournament, second level of a tournament, we're very deep. We've got a good hand, not great hand, at the worst position in the table.
Hmm.
What's your approach against this kind of player? What any thoughts about? We have a 3x open. Do we want to flat and invite the big blind along for a party? Do we want to three bet? Do we ever want to fold? Probably not, but maybe.
Before Joe jumps in, I just want to clarify for our audience. I know we're 100 big blinds as Rob. Are we the effective stack?
No. Well,
S-
yes,
uh,
we are. Yeah, we're the effective stack.
okay.
The opposing
So
player
they
covers
they
us.
have us covered. All right,
Yeah.
fantastic. And yeah. So folks in the YouTube chat, please, what would you do in the circumstance? Type your answers in while we chat about it here, and we'll get a little closer. Joe, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, no, no. Well, as the worst, poker player in this particular group, even worse than Jim's note taker. I guess I'll go first. Ace Jack off doesn't play very well from any position, so I don't think that calling and bringing anybody in, you're just going to get dominated by a lot of different hands and really have a hard time playing out of position against all the different flops that you don't hit. So I think that my standard strategy would be to three bet this, not allow the big blind to get into the pot. You do run the risk that with ace jack, you're going to get called by the in position lag player, but you don't really mind that quite so much because he's going to have a fairly loose range and you're going to dominate that range with something as strong as ace jack. So if you were old man coffee, I might actually be more likely to just fold this, although that's pretty tight. But just against the range that I'd be coming against. You just have to be a little bit ready to hold on a bit with ace jack if you end up with top pair, top kicker, or ace high boards, which is really what you're looking for. But also it's early in the tournament, and there's no sense you're probably not going to be able to pick up a bounty at this point. So being okay with playing it, seeing what you get, three bet, see what happens, and being okay with a fold at a later point and saving your powder for a time when you have position is probably an okay approach as well.
It does, this is going to be one of so I'll just talk about a few of the factors that I'd be thinking about, because I think you can do a lot of different things with this hand, but this is going to be one of the few times that you're out of position versus this player at the table if they're in the hijack and you're in the small blind. So you are going to have a lot of opportunities to play uh, in position against this, loose aggressive player, which is generally a good thing. Um, I like the way that Joe kind of summarized. If we call, we get to keep that wide aggressive player in the hand. We're just super dominating their late position open range with ace jack, but we do invite the big blind in, and like Joe says, we're playing out of position without range advantage when you're covered in particular isn't like a recipe for like a fun way to spend a few minutes, but that's definitely one. There's pros and cons to that, and there's pros and cons to three betting. Um, you get folds a lot of the time, which is great. You get to just clean up. You get to claim 100% of that pot, even though you're only really entitled to half of it. You discourage the big blind player from coming along. Sometimes the button folds, like I say, which is great. Sometimes they call, and as Joe pointed out, we're going to have a lot. We're going to be dominating a lot of their range in that time, and sometimes they're going to four bet. And I don't mind using Ace Jack hands like King Queen offsuit as three bets against some of these players that are going to four bet straightforwardly, because even though they're aggressive openers, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to four bet with a wide range. Usually, four betting is pretty tight in a lot of the games that we're playing. So, Ace Jack, King Queen, they're going to be behind a four betting range. And giving them the option to kind of like reveal the strength of their hand in that way, you might get away from this hand for cheaper by three bet folding it in a spot like this. And of course, good things happen um, when you do get called by weaker ranges. But now you're playing a bigger pot out of position against an aggressive player, and that has its own pros and cons. It's nice to have range advantage, but it's also nice not to have a big pot out of position. So, um, those are the essentially the things I'd be thinking about. Um, Chris, I don't know if you want to run through some of the comments in the YouTube chat. Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. So it's great to hear everyone in the chats. I think a lot of so if there was some questions about is this suited or offsuit. So it's an offsuit ace jack here. Um, and Mike Day says because it's offsuit, I'd probably three bet to 9 or 10 big blinds. Um, he says you want to see a flop with suited cards, et cetera, et cetera. I agree. Float the suited, three better super knit, fold the offsuit and find a better spot. But folding is boring, so we pump it up, says Midwest 1811. And I think I agree. I think especially against the elusive player, you mentioned the old man coffee. That's the kind of player that I would actually be more tempted to uh maybe fold, but probably flat ace jack offsuit against that kind of player. But against this player that has a very wide opening range, I like the three bet. I like the sizing people are suggesting around 10 big blinds. In fact, that's the exact sizing that Rob selects. He three bets to 3,000. And the
I
big
just want to
blind. Oh, go ahead.
Chris, I just want to real quickly follow up on something Jim had said. It can be more clear. I just have a plan, right? Be planful about what
Yeah.
you're going to do if you get flatted, if called by the in position player or four bet, so that you're not surprised by it, and that you can very easily feel comfortable just doing that and enacting it. Be okay with that because it's a long tournament, and you're not going to win it in this particular hand.
Right.
And
Right.
just to take off on that point, because just in case, because I know we have a lot of recreational listeners, um, when you are making that three bet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're bluffing. Like you're raising, and against a lot of the hands that your opponent can have, you're value betting here. You want to get called by worse hands. When they do call you, it's largely going to be by worse hands, um, and it's unlikely that they're going to fold a better hand, but they're going to fold a hand with equity that you can then eliminate. And it's okay to three bet to make this re-raise pre-flop, knowing that some of the times you're going to fold like it doesn't mean sometimes recreational players get stuck on this idea that like, oh, well, I re-raised pre-flop, I three bet pre-flop, so I have like to represent strength with this. But it's important to like have a plan. You want to have some of the hands that you raise with that you're going to call with, some of the hands you're going to fold with, some of the hands that you're going to re-raise with. So like Joe says, just think about how does our opponent's actions intersect with the actions at the table, and what are we going to have? Yeah, Joe.
Sorry.
No.
So this is something that Andrew Brokus often talks about, which is the fact that we don't often think about what power that we're getting by getting the big blind to fold. Because
Hmm.
if you think about the total pie that is the equity for the hand, by simply getting the out of position player to fold, even though you've invested more money into the pot, if that player, he or she is folding away all the equity. So you split that essentially in however the hand comes out with the in position player if they call. So in terms of over time, if you're more willing to three bet in those situations, even though it's a tournament, even though you have some problems, you're making more money because you're forcing some of the equity of a particular hand to roll your way no matter what happens. So even if you have to fold, right? Let's say you run into aces or kings, right? And you get the big blind to fold, but you get 4-bet and you got to fold it away. Just remember that if you keep doing that, you're gaining more equity over time across tournaments, across cash games, because of the equity that the big blind folds.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it's a great point. It's a great point. Because it is really important to think about our share of equity, and it's harder to realize equity out of position. It's even harder to realize it out of position against two opponents, and we're in the worst position at the table. So when we flat here and get called by the big blind, it's a really bad spot for us. It's a hard hand to play. Um, so Rob does 3-bet to 3,000. The big blind does fold, yay. And our sort of loose, aggressive villain calls. And the flop comes. Remember, we have ace jack offsuit. And there's now about, I would say, 6,600 in the pot here. And we have something like 27K behind now. And the flop is Jack 4-3 rainbow. And this is where I think this hand gets kind of interesting for a conversation point. So we have 3-bet, been called, out of position. Um, what's your response about in terms of, well, let me tell you, let me tell you what Rob does, what happens, and then let's talk about it. So this flop goes check, check. Um, and we can go kind of talk about the turn after we get to it. But what do you think of that? And what are you thinking both about our decision to check and what are you thinking when our opponent checks back?
So we're the 3-batter, so there is some intention to potentially c-bet here, but I do think that a lot of times when we're out of position, we don't really, particularly against an aggressive player. Yeah, we have top pair, top kicker, but he could have all the sets. He could potentially have 2-pair. I mean, 3-4 is probably unusual. I don't know about Jack 4, Jack 3, but I think there is it's an easily beaten hand that we need to be pretty careful about before we start piling a lot of money. And since we've already 3-bet, having a check back range in this position allows us to see and have him identify some aspect of his hand range and give us some idea of moving forward. So being out of position in a single raise pot, in particular 3-bet, I'm not opposed to checking here with the intention of calling any bet that the in position player makes.
In a vacuum, this is one of those boards that are hard to hit. Jack 4-3 rainbow. There's no flush draws. They've called a 3-bet, so they're going to have some suited connectors. So there's some straight draw potential there. As Joe says, there's also some sets for sure. But when we're facing a board that's hard to hit, that our opponent's range doesn't strongly intersect with, we're kind of incentivized to make a small bet with a large portion of our range. So I think the default position here would be to continue bet, 25%, 30%, something like that, something pretty small. It keeps our range uncapped. We can continue betting on future streets. But it's also something we get to do with all of our hands that hate this board, because like we say, this is a very difficult board to hit. So it's a kind of like a cheap bluff on a lot of those ones, and you can pick up a pot. My default position, I think, would be to c-bet here. The things that are interesting about it, when we do have a bully opponent who has us covered, particularly in a knockout tournament, there's an argument for sort of giving them some rope and letting them, because like we said, this is a hard board to hit, so it's hard to get called. Like your value bet's going to be hard to get called by a second best made hand. Some worse jacks, hands like pocket sevens, pocket eights, that kind of stuff. Maybe 6-7, with a backdoor flush draw or something can call there, but it's a pretty small part of the range. That's why it's an effective bluff spot, because it's hard for them to continue. So you might give a chance, and you might give them a chance to bluff into you with the parts of their range that don't hit this board. It's not a fun way to play poker, just sort of like holding on and calling down. But the other thing to consider is that our hand actually doesn't require a lot of like protection, if we want to use that word here. We've got top pair, top kicker. There's only 3 cards higher than jacks in the deck, and we've got one of them, which is an ace. So if an ace comes, that's great. If a jack comes, that's great. We don't want to see some of the lower straightening cards, I suppose, and we don't really want to see queens or kings. But as far as things go, this is a pretty safe spot to check. So that's the argument. Those are kind of like the 2 arguments for checking here. I don't know which is the right one. But I think, yeah, the textbook says small C bet. Exploit says maybe we deviate from that here and let them bluff. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think I still like the small C bet here, against particularly against an aggressive opponent. I think like if they have a hand like Jack 10 suited or something, um, they're definitely calling, so we're getting some value. They might raise us. If they have a hand like King Queen that they call the 3-bet with, they're probably calling. They might raise us because they're aggressive. And I don't mind sort of like trying to sort of build this pot. And if they have a hand like King Queen, we're also protecting some of our equity by betting here. I think I would much rather, if I want to have some checkbacks, like a hand like pocket jacks is interesting. I think a hand like pocket aces is interesting. Maybe the
Yeah.
pocket kings are interesting as better potential checkbacks in this situation, or hands like queen jack, or our own jack 10 suited that we 3-bet with that, and now we have top pair, but it's it's not the best possible jack. Since we have top, um, I think I prefer. I mean, I can see, and it's very opponent dependent, and we might be wanting to really, as described, this was what was his wording? Bet sizes are not that thought out. He'll just grab a bunch of chips and throw them out. Like that is the kind of player I want to give a lot of rope. I want
Yes.
them to just kind of like grab a pile and throw them into the middle, especially when I feel like I'm really ahead here. So anything we can do to sort of foster that kind of behavior is uh, good in my book. But I still think this is a really nice small bet situation because we still might get them to pile chips in while we're ahead.
And that's the thing, like, against this opponent, we don't have to like only rope them in on this street. Like if we talked, I guess it was when's that episode coming out? Last week or maybe a week from now. I don't know. We did a forums episode recently talking about this sort of position where like you're out of position, you don't want to wave the white flag by giving up because it invites these bluffs. This is where we should be kind of taking the other side of that coin. Now we want them to start feeling frisky. We've actually got a lot of equity in the hand. We have a lot of showdown value in the hand. And so this is the kind of spot that it's much easier to play out of position when you already have a made hand. Joe, did you have something there?
Yeah, so I guess, in looking at the pot size, right, we're going to have, by my math, 21 in the pot at this point. So it was 3-bet to 10. Do I have that right? Or 18, maybe 920?
It was 3-bet to 3,000, so there's about 6,600 in the pot.
Oh yeah,
And
you're thinking
then
about big blinds,
Big
Joe.
blind, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Big blinds, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
Yeah.
about 20 big blinds, right? So if you do a
yeah.
third pot bet, you're going to bring another 7, and if he raises, that's going to, the call starts to put, stacks into play.
Mhm.
Is top pair top kicker in the second
Mhm.
level of a bounty tournament with a guy that's pretty loose. Are you playing for stacks here? I guess is my question, because I mean, what's the plan? Because
Mhm.
if you call a bet, you're I don't want to say you're committed, but you're pretty committed, right? Because there's a lot of cards, and what are you going to do with it? So
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes these are the kinds of spots where it is opponent dependent. Top is not always like let's get stacks in, But if we are seeing an opponent that villain has been very active with lots of overbets, trying to pressure opponents when he perceives weakness, bet sizes are not thought out, he'll just grab a bunch of chips and throw them out. Yeah, I'm probably willing to go to the mat with top against
Hmm.
that type of player.
Hmm.
Because I think that in terms of thinking about the plan, you can play the small ball or you can play big ball, and you have to know which you feel comfortable with. And at this stage, again, recreational players, it's like second level. You want to go home? I
Right.
mean, you want to buy back in? And it sounds funny, but it's true. Is you have to make a decision. Is okay. I got top pair, top kicker against a loose player. If I can pull his stack, I'm going to set myself up for a little while to play, but it does run the risk that he has pocket fours, right? Not
Right.
pocket fives, but it's pocket
Right.
fours, and
Right.
that's a set on this board, and you're drawing pretty slim at
Yeah,
that point.
it's very thin
Yeah,
if we're up against a
yeah,
set here, which is possible, right? It's
Yeah.
possible. Um,
and
And he is entitled to have those
yeah,
very strong hands too.
right,
Like
yeah.
even if we're saying he's a very aggressive player, he's got a very wide range. The wide range, even the widest ranges also include the strong hands. It's just that they're a much smaller part of the range when it's a wider range. So,
right.
um, yeah,
So
that is gonna happen.
let's talk. I mean, I think you could argue for a small bet or check sometimes. I think both of those I think are valid potential plays at this point. But when this player that we've just described, I've mentioned it multiple times in the description, they check behind. What's your before we get to what the
Hmm.
turn is and what happens on the turn, what that is, especially when we describe villain has been very active and tries to pressure opponents when he perceives weakness. When we've three bet and then checked, and then they check behind, what's against the player who has tended to like attack weakness and now chooses not to? What is your thought about what's going on in this dynamic before we ever see a turn card?
So they've declined to
Mhm.
add some fold equity into this equation in a spot where it appears that fold equity would have some weight. Like you said, we've shown weakness, we've declined to bet. So if we have a player who's typically just taking advantage of that all the time, you have to have a couple little red flags going off in the back of your mind when they choose to check back. Because for the same reason this was a good board for you to see bet, it's also a good board for them to float bet. It's hard for you to intersect with. Your three betting range is likely to have a ton of two overcards to this. Um, and so you should have some folds depending on the sizing that our opponent uses here. So when they choose not to do that, part of me, or I guess all of me, thinks that part of them is doing it to Joe's giving me the look here. Sometimes they're doing this with like pocket jacks or the set of threes or the set of fours. Like I could see checking back with pocket jacks here all day because you're blocking all the hands that you would want your opponent to have with top pair. And again, you're just not worried. There's no protection element
Mhm.
required when you have a hand that strong. Probably true for all the sets here. So I do think I feel like their checking range might actually be stronger than their betting range.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Joe, do you have any thoughts or anyone in the YouTube chat for that one?
No, and I think it depends on the player. I mean, typically, if it's, a recreational player is going to check back, it's going to be weakness, and you can just presume that with top, you have probably the best hand. But I think that again, for the same reasons, because it's a three bet pot and there was a call, there's not that much that if you end up putting any more money in this pot, you're getting close to, you know, having a really difficult decision with a really strong hand against a player who you've identified as being um, a bully, right?
Mhm.
And but I agree that it's kind of weird. You essentially, by checking in that position, you really want him to bet and to reveal some aspect of his hand so that you can just use it as a bluff catcher and call down and use the rope against him. But he kept the rope up, and so now you're stuck at the bottom of
Right.
the cliff, and you got to figure out how you're going to get up there. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think I like the analysis here. I think um, it can either be just a complete give up, or there could be some real strength involved in what
Mhm.
our villain's doing here when they check
so
back.
it's a polarized check range.
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
It's a
it
polar
is.
check. It is. It's an interesting thing. It's a polar check. So the turn is a 10. It completes the rainbow. So now there's no flush draws available. Board is now Jack 10, 4, 3, complete rainbow. And Rob elects into this pot of about 6,600. He elects to bet 4,000. So around a 2/3 pot size bet. And villain calls.
I think I don't like the bet size personally. I think it's a big pot already. This guy is somewhat loose. If you are concerned about some strength that he has, if he's got nothing, a small bet would probably get rid of him anyway. If he's going to fold it out, I don't know that I'd go very small, but 2/3 seems a lot, and it really starts to bloat that pot up. And if the river is a blank, what do you do, right? So it's like thinking about where am I going to go next. I'm not certain where I am in that hand, and I'm not helping myself any. So I don't know that I would go. If you don't want to go too small, but you could almost go 1/3 to a 40% pot bet and accomplish the same thing here, given that it hasn't changed the board texture that much.
Jim?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Chris. I was just writing something down when it was a 10 on the turn.
10. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's Jack 10, 4, 3 rainbow.
So we should be, again, a delayed C bet here is super effective a lot of the time. It's great hand for our overcard range. It brings in a straight draw. It doesn't really change much about our opponent's, weaker range. Now we're in this leveling situation where we've shown weakness, and then by declining to float bet us on the flop, they've shown weakness, and so we should be now betting with a lot of bluffs. So that's even more reason to be betting with our value hands. It's not really how it works, but that's kind of how it ends up. Um, uh, yeah, I'm with Joe about the sizing. I think we can size this down a little bit, which we can do and still kind of have the same effect. So that's just generally a good tournament strategy. Uh, but I think I'm betting here. I think it, yeah, I think yes. Sorry, I'm going through like, why would I not be betting here? I guess is the question. Is there any reason not to bet here? We do want we've already kind of shortened the game. We've taken a street off. I think with top pair, top kicker, it might not be a three streets of value hand when you're the better. I think it's probably three streets of value hand when you're the caller against a bluffy opponent, but it's definitely two streets of value as the better. So I think we can bet here and then bet again on the river under most runouts and expect to get called by a second worst hand. So that's what I would be inclined to do.
Yeah. And I'm gonna take a little bit of the opposite. I like sizing around this range here.
Mhm.
We've already lost that opportunity on the flop, and we still have a very strong hand, and I think we can still capture value from um, all the straight draws, all the 10x, the worst jack X. Um, I think all of that we can count on potentially calling us even for this size of a bet. Um, and it's harder to raise us when we bet to this sizing as
Mhm.
well without some kind of value in hand. Especially with only one card to come. Like if they've had king queen this whole time and we didn't sort of try to push them off that on the flop, um, that's a hand you might be tempted to raise, but it gets harder. The deeper you go into a hand, it gets harder to raise with those kinds of holdings. So I think I like something like at least a half pot bet here.
So I guess so. Everybody should always listen to Chris. Don't
Well,
listen to me.
I don't know about that.
Everything. Well, psychology, you can listen to me. Everything else, Chris. That's how you should work for him. I guess the question would be: we've just gone through this discussion of the fact that he has the polarized range at this point, and we essentially have. I don't know if it's necessarily capped, but we've shown some weakness in that moment. And with what we may consider to be not a polarized range. My understanding of theory is always, well, you don't want to bet bigger, right? Because you don't want to polarize yourself unless that's what we're doing. So I guess that would be my question to you, and help me. You know this better than I do.
I think it's
Does that
more
make sense?
yeah, it does make sense. I mean, it's a good point. It's a good point. The way I think about sizing is sort of thinking about like if we think about if we sort of visualize the range, right? How much of the range is are we likely to be ahead of and behind at this point? And I think there is like we've made the compelling case that there could be this sort of like check back range that is very strong. Well, the only thing that's really now sort of on this turn card, the only thing that's really like shifted at all. So, you know, sets of jacks, sets of fours, sets of threes. Those are already dominating us. We were really behind those to begin with. The only thing that's really changed here is if they had a hand like Jack 10, right? And they thought they checked it back because they had like marginal value after a three bet pot, and now they've hit two pair. Um, so that's a hand that's on my mind, but I'm not going to bet just because that hand might exist. I'm going to bet because I think there's a larger portion of this range that will pay me off on a bigger bet that I am better than, that I have a better, and that's the part that I'm targeting really. I want to see King Jack, Queen Jack, King Queen, all those sort of like Queen Nine suited even. Like um I want to target those hands and just see if I can. And I think they'll call off a bigger bet here. And so and in fact, it makes it harder for them to figure out what to do there. So that's sort of the thinking behind that for me.
With the idea, again, just to go back to the flop plan or thought process, and again, people are more honest on the turn in general, but against the loose player that we're playing, again, if he you bet and he raises, are you calling that off?
I mean, against most players, I'm probably that's probably enough for me to be like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
out of here. But against this
Right.
player, I probably am hanging on.
Okay.
Um, so
That's, I'm just thinking about how
yeah,
to plan out if
yeah,
I'm going to do particularly a bigger bet, because with a two-thirds size pot, a two-thirds pot bet, you're again moving right back into
yeah,
that. Well,
yeah, you
you're
are.
kind of committed. So
You are. You are. Okay. Well, uh, the villain calls us, which I think is interesting, right? When we get called here, I think that does also continue to speak to, I mean, maybe sets still are just kind of like, let's kind of like keep yanking you along. But it's very likely there's a large portion of its range that we're ahead of that calls us here because I think some of those hands are starting to be like Jack 10 feels like a good like raise here for this
They raise for sure. Jack 10 raises here for sure, I
right. And so
think.
like I think we can start to remove some of those when they call us from their potential holdings.
Yep.
Um so
And
uh
honestly, and also just to that point, pocket like the sets are also incentivized to
right,
raise here now because it introduces the Broadway straight. Like
right.
there's definitely a lot of ways that this card is not great for a set holder.
Right.
Um,
And they
so
have to still also the Broadway straights there, but I think also if they're I don't know, this is pretty low stakes tournament, and I don't know how much Rob or others are sort of like Rob does. Rob is probably aware of this, but I don't know if like some of the opponents are aware of this. But like I think Rob's very capable of having a hand like Ace Five here in his three betting range, Ace Deuce in his three betting range,
yeah,
even a hand like Ace Three and Ace Four in his suited. Um, and so that those straights and sort of two pairs and whatever are available, or at least one pair. Sorry, one pair and those straights are available as well. Um, so anyway, regardless, um, the villain calls and the river is another 10. So the board is now Jack 10 10 4 3. No flushes available. And it's on us as our hero. We've already made this bet. Um, And let's just, so there's about 15,000, about 14,600 in the pot. Rob has about 23,000 behind, so he's got like one and a half pot or so behind. I'll just tell you what happens and then we can discuss. Rob checks and villain jams.
One of the hands that I had in my head was pocket tens.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
I mean, it just makes sense all the way along that that's a possibility. I mean, he made a boat if he's got Jack 10, right? He's got a boat if he's got any of the sets. And all we have is top pair, top kicker, right? Essentially, I mean, I know we have two pair on the board, but and he's shown strength. I'm tempted to say that this I'd fold, and just try to find a better spot, because I think there are too many things that. Was he do this? He had queens all along. He had nines. Is he really doing this with nines? Is he really doing it with, I guess what 8-9 would be the straight draws, or king queen. I mean,
King queen,
yeah,
queen nine suited could be there.
yeah. I guess there's
Ace
enough.
queen could be
I guess
there.
there's enough bluffs that he could do it, but I just think it's, yeah, what do we have left? What, 60 big blinds? I mean, that's a lot of big blinds to base basically on just calling off at this point, when we've been a little concerned that he has the polarized range. So that's
Chris.
that's me. But
Chris, do we know, did the turn 10 bring in a flush draw?
No, it was a complete rainbow.
Complete rainbow. Okay, so when he calls the turn, there's no flush draw on there.
Right.
It's some straight draw, some one pair hands, and we've eliminated basically all the two pair hands, I think, at this point. A lot of the sets. So like pocket eights is right in there, I think, still. Jack Queen, Jack Nine, some of those one pair hands that we're ahead of. I think, listen, he has 10 here sometimes. Like if you had 10x in your hand, this is how you would like this. That's one of the ways you would. That's one of the hands you would play this way. You would call a 3-bet pre-flop.
You check
You
you call the,
you would
and then
you check the flop behind. You'd turn a pair and call. Like, so it all makes sense. Totally makes sense for them to have a hand like 9-10 or 10-8 or Queen 10. Um, that is all perfectly consistent. We cannot remove the tens from their range here. So the only question for us is what else can we put in that range that means that we can call this? Because we definitely we want to call. We've kind of said, I want to call. If this is me in Rob's spot, this is kind of what we wanted. We've faked weakness. We actually have a pretty strong hand. We've laid the trap for our opponent. Yeah, it would be nice if it was a lot of other cards that they chose to shove on. But this is kind of what we wanted to happen. So, and we can't eliminate the strength from their range. So what else can we put in there? What else does it make sense for them to be doing this with? And I think it's really, and sorry, Chris, we bet the river and he
no,
raises?
we check the river, which I think is another interesting
Yeah,
part of
because
this.
that's another thing where you're like, come bluff,
Yeah.
make that bluff shove.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's one of those where you're like, come bluff shove it. No, 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 not that big.
right. Yes. But it does really it does what we wanted. It puts a lot of other hands in his shove range here that would not be there if we had bet and he was raising over a bet. Joe, you had something, then I'll continue that thought.
no, I was just trying to think it through if it's a bet fold spot, and I'm not even necessarily sure if it is,
Mm,
because it's still
hmm
the same player type. Is there a benefit to just jamming ourselves at that moment? Probably not. So I think it's a really hard spot to kind of put out something that you're not going to be in this position. And
hmm
I think that
Yeah.
that's really kind of what this hand all the way through, regardless of what it comes out, is like, you have to be prepared for what you're going to do, because otherwise you're going to agonize and not and randomly do something. It's kind of like, okay, I'm in this spot. I've decided where I'm going to go on this road, and this road may just take me off the cliff, but this is the road we're going to go down, regardless of what Google tells me I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to end up here, which again, it's like single pair hand, right? Top pair, top kicker against somebody that's calling off. So
yeah, yep.
Chris, is there anything else that you want to tease out? Or if you're in the YouTube chat, just type in before we go, just type in what you would do in this spot. So you check the river and they overbet
Yeah,
and
one
jam.
and a half times the pot jam on this Jack 10-10-4-3 board.
Yeah. For your tournament life, but not theirs.
Right.
Um,
In a bounty tournament too.
Right now, let's just talk about that a little bit. We don't cover our opponent. So what's different about a bounty tournament? Like why what should that how should that influence our decision? How should that inform our conversation?
Yeah, I'm sort of much more familiar and much more used to playing some of the PKO style tournaments where bounties can actually become fairly meaningful.
Hmm.
Like these sort of bounty style things, I always just think it's just kind of like it's like a little bonus for me. It's not something that really influences all that much how I play. Like it's like, oh, cool, like I want a bounty, but it's not like, oh, I gotta change the way I'm playing because there's like half the first prize pool at stake here. Like I gotta figure out how I'm going after this. You know what I mean? So like I wouldn't put too much into thinking about the bounty here. Um, I
wasn't there
don't think this
something?
player is doing this because they're like, I'm going after this $50 bounty.
And I mean, I haven't really studied the Dara's book on bounties and tournaments and so on, but it seems like it's kind of early to be putting 100 big blinds into the hope of winning $50. I'm just not sure that the ICM model would say that that's a good payoff at this point, since you're jettisoning so much equity elsewhere to try to aim for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that doesn't seem to make sense to me.
So I'll just read some of the responses here. Our own Rabman50 is in the chat, and he
Hey,
says I'd
Rob.
call. Mike Day says fold. Midwest 1811 says I'd take the $150 re-entry from my wallet, set it on the rail, and call. Which is nice. I the in the actual original Discord post, we had a few more responses. Craig Savage said call based on opponent type and where we are in our range. DFS Brat says, yeah, I agree. Call is best. Um, I posted in there and said I would call in this based on the read. They should have some 10x sometimes and GG when they do, but they're going to have so much air as part of their range that I think we're too high up in ours to sort of let this one go. Um, but I'm not sure I'm right. I'm not sure. So it sounds like there's kind of a mix between fold and call here. It's a big bet.
I think what makes it a call for me is that we got what we wanted. Like
Mm,
we laid
mm.
out this plan, it all went according to plan. Like if we're not going to call here, we should be c betting the flop. Like we should just be playing a more conventional game. We we intentionally deviated so that we could get our opponent to make the kind of mistakes that we can predict. They've taken the kind of action that's consistent with those mistakes. Is it in fact a mistake? Or are they just playing correctly and they've got the good part of the range and not the bad part of the range? Only one way to find out. But like, I would be, I'd be more inclined to bet fold than to check fold. I can say that much for sure. Um, because we have just shown so little strength and we have a very strong hand, like you say, Chris, in our distribution, like this is pretty high up for how the hand has been played. Um, yeah, I just feel like it might not be the right call, but I feel like it's what we've been trying to achieve. And so we should call. I call. I call.
I mean, otherwise it puts us into the place of having ace jack and we're set mining without a pair, right? Because we're
Right.
not going
Yeah.
to, so.
Right.
But
Yeah, I mean,
it,
it's a really good point. Like what it might leave us with only pocket jacks
Right.
as the only if we fold this, like maybe we have aces. I don't know how Rob would play aces here. If he would check aces on this flop, maybe we also have aces and we land here. So we might have aces. We might
Quad
have
tens.
pocket
Yeah,
jacks. We
quad
might have
tens.
quad tens. Good point. We might have
Yeah.
quad tens. So, but if that's the extent of our calling range, that's not enough against this kind of a opponent, and that probably means a hand like Ace Jack needs to be in there.
I, I think one thing so did you say this is like this third level, right?
Yeah, it's
So
second level, I
or
think.
second. So was this a player that Rob had played before, or it was just guy that looked loose
I mean, he said, I think the thoughts are in that villain has been very active. So he
Okay.
obviously has a bigger stack than Rob. So he's got more than starting. He's been very active with lots of over bets, trying to pressure opponents when he perceives weakness. So
Yeah.
at least through a level and a half or two levels, Rob has observed this about this opponent. It's not a ton to go on, but it's,
Right.
and
Yeah.
at least some observations there.
I mean, if he's really been fairly active, then that widens his range a lot more. Then I think that it just pushes towards the call. But I would really be on it. You've only got what 30 hands on him at most because it's
Right.
Well, no,
Right.
actually, it could be more than that. I suppose it could be a fair amount. It could
But
be
yeah,
almost
you're not going to get
DVI,
like a
right?
good sample size on
Right.
river over
Yeah.
bets. Yeah.
Right.
And if you
Yeah.
do, then right?
Then yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, no, very true, very true.
Well,
I just want to take a second to shout out because I know we're wrapping up here, but some really cool folks in the YouTube chat this week, some new folks as well. Midwest 1811 making some great points. I think they've played at the Orleans before, based on based on some context clues I'm picking up here. But I'm really enjoying this feedback from our YouTube chat. Some really cool stuff in there so far.
well, we do have results. Should I tell us what results are?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No, so okay, wait. Do I have any guesses here before we actually tell any results? Because like what you really want is you just want him to wave over like the queen nine of something, and then Rob gets to do a little dance, being the badass that he is. He's like, gave him the breadcrumbs and they followed the trail and snapped him off, and there you go. Um, but I do think it's just a set of jacks sometimes too.
I think he's got pocket fours.
Pocket fours. Yeah, that
So
makes a lot of
pocket
sense.
fours. Your guess is what, Jim?
I'll go with well, I think they're actually bluffing. So I'm gonna go with like queen nine. I'm gonna say
Queen
they had
nine. Okay,
queen
pocket
nine
fours,
into it.
queen nine. I know, so I can't guess.
Yeah.
If you're in the chat, give us a guess.
You got
What
a
you
couple
got?
couple guesses,
Um,
ace two suited or king jack are
King
the
Jack,
two that jumped in. Um yeah, loving this YouTube chat. All right. So
Ace five, Ace Deuce or Ace five are some of the guesses.
yeah, that
So
makes
Rob
sense.
does end up calling, and villain turns over Ace Queen offsuit.
Yes!
Let's
Those
go.
two
Let's go.
overcards. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. Way to sniff it out, Rob. That's why
Nice
Rob's the
call, Rob.
best.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think it's one that we have to be comfortable. I think like I like this call. I like it a lot. And sometimes you're going to look like an idiot because they are
Yes.
going to have pocket fours or just ace 10 or something. And it's just like, yeah, nice, good game.
Yeah.
Here's my bounty. But yeah, I think this is a spot where I think we have to just defend our range sometimes, and we're just too strong. And especially, we have to remember that this goes back to what we've been talking about in the deep dive too. Is like player typing is only really useful if we, like Joe's been talking about, plan ahead and actually figure out a way to like dig down deep and act on it. Like, okay, we've got this understanding of how this player is sort of perceiving the world, approaching the game, and they're going to do these certain things that are maybe wild or they're super tight and they're never going to do anything like that. And then those things should help, really help us make decisions. And then we have to to like actually make those decisions in the moment when they come up.
So And so we talk a lot about leveling, we talk about player typing, right? But people often forget to player type themselves. And what I mean by that is, as you get further and further into the hand, as you get closer and closer to that last chip phenomena, right? This is, I can't, if I put this chip in, I'm done. With the tournament, you have to understand how you're going to respond in that moment when he shoves on the river and you have top pair, top kicker on a board that's paired, right? And where you think that he might have shown strength. And if you don't have a plan, it means that you better have a good understanding of how you're going to respond and how you want to respond. And it's just better to plan, know who you are, and know how you want to play it so that you know who you want to take advantage of at the poker table, because then you'll make calmer decisions and you'll make better plays because you won't make them based upon an emotional response of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, and so I'll just flip a coin. And coin flips are not what you want to be doing at any point if you can avoid it. You got to win some of them in a tournament, but you don't want
that's right.
Coin flipping with no idea of where you are.
Right. Yeah, don't let coin flips be your upside.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, this is a really good conversation. Thanks to all our YouTube chatters. If you're a premium member and you're watching live, head over to the website calendar. We're about to go record another forums edition of the podcast with Mark Zhang. Mark's prepared a couple of spots that I think are going to be very illuminating to our members. Those will come out a little later in October in some forums editions of the podcast coming up in a few weeks. But we're going to go record that now. If you're not a premium member, thank you so much for coming in and enjoying the show with us live here on YouTube. Super fun. I want to thank Rob Washam for posting such a fantastic spot, Chris Jones for pulling it and leading our strategy conversation today, Joe Coolis for all his support and his amazing contributions as a RecPoker Crew member. So yeah, thanks to the YouTube chatters, thanks to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, thanks to our audience at home, and thanks to my mom and everyone else who's listening in. Have a great week and a great night, everybody. We'll see you again sometime soon on the RecPoker Podcast.